Yeah, I'll answer from two angles. One, from just the general organization, right? I think that the biggest reason they do it is they're proud of what they're doing. They're excited about what they're doing. They want to share what they're doing. It gives them an opportunity to be deeper and further engaged, right? So I think a huge part of just creating that culture is really the satisfaction that an employee can derive from being connected. And that connected, it doesn't mean it's a salesperson that calls on an account team, calls on an account. It can be somebody, at the quote unquote, back of the office, right? That's connected. So it makes a big difference there. And again, it just starts with Michael. So if you follow Michael Dell and you get a tweet, and that's his tweet, right? If you put something on LinkedIn, that's his content. He has a comms team, but they don't do any of his social media work, right? We use something internally, Chatter, and he's on there all the time, right? So, and then he also, then I'll switch over to kind of more of moving away from the organic discussion and more of the focused, more practical side is, he goes out and checks, right? So he goes out to there's 293 vice presidents at Dell. And he goes out and checks and says, how many of these guys are socially active? And you will get a chatter from Michael directly that says, hey, I haven't seen you out here connecting with the wider audience. Do you need some help? So you get that first, you need some help, man, you really get on it. Right? But then I'm switching over to like my marketing organization. So things were happening organically, right? But I wanted to accelerate that. So I was the first organization in Dell to train the entire organization end to end. So I have 270 plus marketing professionals. We went through and created a specific program around through the SMAC organization where every one of them has a role, right? And so we said, hey, we want to engage, we want to empower that engagement, but I also want to inspect that engagement, right? So if we're going to accelerate this, we also need to know how we're going to measure it and what we're going to measure. And so we put a comprehensive end-to-end plan in for every single person in the organization. They all have a role. So some of it is purely internally focused. That's where they're at. That's where they are in their social media journey, to thought leadership and kind of everything in between. And so now, when we do annual reviews, right, you can't get a top review in my organization if you're not socially active, right? You can get a really good review, right, but you can't be in the top rung unless you're socially active. And again, that's really dependent upon what that social active means for that individual role and that individual employee. So it's all very customized to them, right? So we invested headcount in it, metrics, analytics, the whole thing around it to really try to accelerate it.
That's great. With the big investments that you guys are making, in particular Sharon and Brian from Hitachi and Dell, are you worried that you invest all this money in your employees and then they leave and they go off and do other things? Is that a worry at all, especially with the big capital you're committing to these programs?
So we're about 10 months into this social media experiment, and every month over the 10 months, my attrition rate has gone down. Right? Do I have people? Do we have people that leave the company? Yeah, absolutely. Where I actually am challenged is I'm building a bunch of social media experts that are sometimes being picked off by other people in the organization, right? Other organizations, right? But the attrition rate has actually gone down because they're more engaged, they're more excited, they're more, they have a voice. You've given them this voice that is very custom to them, and what they do with it is the thing that I'm most interested in, and the innovation that they drive with it.
That's
right.
I've
seen the exact opposite. I've seen them be more satisfied and more connected to the company.
Fantastic.
Same with Hitachi, we're not worried, and in fact it's the opposite. And now we're to the point where people are coming to us, to the ambassador program, saying, I want to be one of these ambassadors. I see other people who are successful. I see other people that are thought leaders. How can I be successful? So we have a mentoring program for it. But we've broken our ambassadors into 4 groups. And so we have segmented our ambassadors into the certain types. So for example, we have subject matter expert types. And the mentoring we do for those types is very different from our community masters. And so what we do for these ambassadors is we train them by function to be successful, and they want to stay, they want to contribute, they want to be part of the brand. So one of the recommendations I have for the group that's trying to get started or thinking about ambassador programs is to do that segmentation, is to look at your entire employee base and say, which of these employees are coming to you because they want to be experts in their area? Which are coming to you because they want to manage communities? Which are coming to you because they're just enthusiastic about your brand and they want to have that voice or that channel or that platform? And who are your executives? Who are your social sponsors? And how can you treat them and mentor them in a way that they don't feel embarrassed to say, I don't know how to tweet, help me. So it's a strong recommendation.
One assumption that we're all making, and maybe the four of us are lucky, is that we work in places where employees like being there. So if the employees don't like their boss, which is always the #1 dissatisfier in any organization, if they don't like their stock options, if they don't like their compensation, if they don't like the latte machines, they're not going to be advocates. And you can whip them, you can pay them, you can do whatever you want, but they're more likely to go on all the subterranean sites that talk about how miserable it is to work at Accenture or Deloitte or General Motors or somewhere. And that's also where a lot of people go. So I mean, this saw cuts, just as we're creating the social platforms to be advocates, there's an equal and opposite group of websites that are cutting, allowing the saw to cut the other way. So if you don't have a group of employees that like working there, you have other problems besides advocacy.
Good point.
I'd actually love to stripe in on that too as well. We're so open and honest and constructive. That last part is very important for us, constructive. So we allow our employees also to use social internally. So to have these communities and these conversations, and we're listening. Our CEO is on it every day, listening to them. And he'll bring it up at our all hands if he hears something. Like, hey, I heard you guys talking about this, let's talk about it right now. Let's set up level straight. So I think part of that too is also, there's a great point here, is to make sure you're listening. If they're not happy with something, bring the conversation in-house. Don't be afraid to listen to it. So you can make sure that the voice that is being shared externally as well is a little bit more honest and also hopefully telling a complete story.
And one last comment on that, if I may. I would bet $10 right now that if all of you did an internal employee survey inside your organization, right now, the #1 issue would be communications. Now, what that means is another issue, but I think that advocacy can work to solve that employee communication issue.
Right. Yeah, and that's something that we generally see, is that our customers find tremendous benefits just from the communication aspect of keeping their employees in the loop and up to speed. They feel more informed and more engaged as a result. Whether they become advocates or not, they're at least more informed, and that on its own is a pretty powerful benefit. Obviously, if brands are thinking about doing employee advocacy, there must be some corporate benefits that you guys have in mind. I mean, do you look at it that way? Is employee advocacy a thing to be measured? Are you being asked to measure that by your management organizations, or as senior executives yourselves, are you asking your teams to measure employee advocacy and the outcomes? And what are those? I mean, is it happiness, Sharon, to your point, or is it transactional, like lead generation or sales? Chris, why don't you go first? Since you guys are pioneering social selling at LinkedIn. Yeah?
In so many places though, I think that selling, and lead generation, is kind of a generic. That's kind of what we think about with social media. Going back to, for us, sitting in Silicon Valley, so we're competing against all of our neighbors, our peers, Google, Apple, and we're looking for engineers. So when I think about talent, that's a big part of it as well. So that's why we focus on culture in this career transformation. And this is great for employees. We give them that channel, that space to be able to share. We're really talking about our talent brand. That's what we're really trying to engage, which obviously fits really well with the LinkedIn, culture and environment and the resources we have. Measurement is important. It's very important to our talent acquisition team as well as we look forward and as we look to reinvent what we're doing. I think when we look back at our sales or solution organization, it's absolutely about lead gen. It's about awareness of product. It's about our expansion, and it's definitely got to be measured. I think we're still trying to figure some of that out. I would be interested to find out. I think the world changes and it evolves, and our story evolves and what employees need to be advocates evolves. So the measurement changes a little bit as well. What we're trying to achieve can change. So I think it still needs to be played out.
Yeah, one of the more interesting metrics that I heard from a customer recently was a metric around talent acquisition acceleration, the ability to hire faster.
Yep.
And our client measured every week that they were able to hire an employee faster with a actual hard dollar figure of $20,000 per week of incremental value that those employees would generate if they just started sooner. So there's a real value associated with certainly accelerating talent acquisition, especially if you can get the right people and hold on to them, let alone the cost savings of reducing recruiting costs and all the rest. But yeah, I think that's a really compelling and interesting area. It leads me to kind of ask you guys a question around content and activities, things that your employees could actually share and do for you to drive some of these kinds of results, whether it's lead generation or talent acquisition or e-commerce or sales or whatever it might be for your respective brand. Can you get your employees to actually share the kind of content that's going to drive those outcomes? Is it getting your employees to share job listings at LinkedIn? Is it getting people to share thought leadership at Hitachi and Dell to drive B2B lead gen, for example? What is it that drives those kinds of outcomes for you guys, and what content is appropriate versus inappropriate? Brian, why don't you take that one on?
Yeah, so I think that the most important thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to catch the front of the wave around the way marketing is changing and evolving, right? Social engagement, digital engagement is so much more critical today than it was even 9 months ago, a year ago, 3 years ago, right? So I'm convinced, the reason we're doing this organizationally, right, end-to-end organizationally, is I'm convinced this is the only way forward from a marketing perspective, right? So I think if we don't do this, it's innovate or be irrelevant, right? So it's very much, for me, that's a big part of it. So when we launch a campaign, when we launch a program, it has to have the right social elements, and then it has to have the right social infrastructure to raise the water, right? So the boats come up too, right? So that's a big part of it. For me, though, the most important part of that is authenticity and making an authentic connection to our customers or prospects. So I'm not interested in at all in an artificial push of content or an artificial connection placed out there, right? I think consumers, right, whether it's B2B or B2C, recognize that, spot that immediately, and it's actually damaging your brand way more than it could be potentially positive, right? And so when you talk about just-in-time marketing and real-time social media engagement, stuff like that, I think you have to be really careful. And so for me, I'm really most interested in, and again, we did the same thing that Hitachi Data Systems did. We segmented all of our marketing organization, and when I look at when I think about content, I think about our thought leaders. They want to share with the world what we're doing that's innovative and what they think you could do with it as a customer to improve your business or your life, right? So I want them making that. So I don't put on them any kind of, you got to share X amount of content or Y amount of anything like that, right? We're still trying to figure out exactly what the right metrics are, right? It's kind of one of those things of, I'm not sure what good, I couldn't really define good, but I know when I see it.
Right.
Right? Because for me, it's really more about making that emotional connection and establishing that emotional connection. Because we use we have a social media command center and listing post that we run globally, and then we set up regionally when we're running big events or when there's a big there's a big convention or something. We'll set up even specific listing posts around those things, right? Because we want to make that connection, right?
Right.
We want to be able to deliver against turning an advocate into a stronger advocate, or really identifying a detractor and helping that detractor and moving that detractor from a detractor to an advocate. And so we also combine this with Net Promoter Score. So we use NPS in the company and pretty extensively, and so we're doing that as well too. So, but for me, it's all about making that authentic connection. I don't want anything artificial out there. I want them to connect the way they want to connect, and they will figure out the content strategy. They'll figure out how to do it.
Sure.
So I think at Hitachi Data Systems, we find that people do not want to buy from the brand, they want to buy from people. And so we have a hub and spoke model, and in our hub, I think I'm so great, I'm always getting great content, and look at all this beautiful content behind Hitachi Data Systems, isn't this wonderful? Well, I did a little bit of a study, I did a metric, and I found out that in terms of the voice that we have from our brand, and then comparing the voice that we have from our brand to the voice that we have by adding up the voice of all of our employee advocates, what I found was that Hitachi Data System brand voice is about 13% of the total voice. That means that our influence is by this 86% or so of the people that are employees that are out there. So when you look at that difference, it's not really the brand that's talking, it's not really the brand that's engaging. And in fact, the HDS corporate account is probably the least engaging of all of our accounts, right? It's the people that are engaging, it's the people that are connecting, it's that 80+% of the people that are out there having that real conversation. So in terms of content, we're not so much focused on what's the content that HDS can talk about. It's really saying, what are the snippets, what are the snackable pieces of information that we can give to our advocates and let them localize and let them think about it and add opinions and add interesting things so that when they talk, they're the ones that are influencing that conversation. So to us, that's scale, and we measure that in terms of what percentage are our employees talking versus the brand.
Really comes back to a point that Rich brought up earlier, which is communicate and inform your employees first, and then they can take kind of that message out in their own authentic voice to become advocates in an appropriate way.
It needs to be authentic, but it also needs to be current.
Right.
So if there's breaking news this morning about an SEC regulation, our people need to be able to talk about what that means for our clients. So it's both authentic and current, and that's the sweet spot.
That's great. That's great. Well, I think it's interesting that authenticity and communication is really key, and the undercurrent of how you can leverage advocates, whether they're employees or consumers, to engage on your behalf. I think that's so true, especially if you look at data from Nielsen and Edelman that talks about declining trust in brand and the increasing or gaining trust in employees and consumers. And so it really is a smart way to think about your strategy as a brand marketer or as a PR professional, to think about how you can take your brand story and put it into the hands of consumers and employees and empower them to tell the story in their own authentic voice versus trying to just shove more brand communication down the channel and hope for the best, I guess. So that's a great kind of a key point. Well, before we run out of time, I thought I'd open it up to the audience for a couple of questions. And I'm going to ask everyone just one question as a start. How many of you guys are actually utilizing advocates at your businesses? I'd love to just see that by a show of hands. Okay, so not bad. So I mean, we've got probably a quarter of the room kind of using advocates. So there's a real opportunity for the rest of you guys to start thinking about how you can leverage advocates as part of your PR and marketing mix. So with that said, are there any questions from the audience that you'd like to ask any of our panelists about what's working well for them or not, and how that could potentially benefit your organizations? Yeah.
Susan Foxall, Davis Instruments. I have a question about allowing employees to be social, and then how does that affect the productivity in their kind of defined job assignment, and is there some limitation? Not that you can be social for a full day, or are there times? How do you kind of balance that out in terms of social versus productivity?
I can start with that. So I think when we started at Hitachi Data Systems, we had our broadband turned down low for YouTube so that people couldn't go in there. You couldn't access Facebook. So those were some of the mistakes we made at the beginning. Now I think we've really made a change, and that people want to be social. They want to be doing this as part of their job. They want to be doing this on work time, and we've opened up those gates. We've let that happen. And I think now we're actually to the point where people are like, well, I don't want to spend too much time. I want to kind of put like 2 hours a week to some people, or 2 hours a month, and put that in my goals and say that's about where I want to go. And I think our corporation is very good at opening it up and saying, do what's right for you and saying, hey, you guys talk to customers all the time anyway, figure out what it means to do that either socially, online, or face-to-face and manage that. But we're completely open now in terms of allowing people to do what they need to do their job.